Hi, good afternoon. Welcome, everybody. Thank you for joining us. We are ready to get started with today's virtual webinar series around leading and working when you're unsure what to expect. And before we get started and Gina introduces us to our topic today, I just want to get you connected to our Slido activity so you can join in on answering some of the polls and submitting your questions for the Q&A section. So as always, we think the easiest way to do this is to use the camera on your mobile device. You can use your camera, just point it there at the QR code on the screen and it should prompt you to open the link. You can also go to slido.com, and when you are asked for the code, enter the code that you see on the screen, lead, and there'll be a section where we're going to administer some live polls that we'd like you to take part in, as well as a Q&A section where you can submit your questions that we'll be answering at the end. And also, we will learn about some resources along the way, and you'll be able to access those as we go by using the little three-lined burger icon at the top left of your mobile device. And we'll also be sharing those in follow-up. So I'd like to introduce you to our host today, Dr. Janet Pilcher.
Thank you, Mandy. I wish everything was as easy as being able to point our camera at the little the scanned icon and getting our work done. You know, so great tool there. So thanks for the introduction. Hello to everyone. Welcome to our webinar today, and I look forward to talking through where we are and what's ahead of us, and a little bit about the unknown and maybe how we prepare for that. And so we'll start with looking at turning anxiety into opportunities. All of us, regardless of where we work, where we live in the world, we're experiencing anxiety in our lives. And so I just really want to talk a few minutes about how we can manage through those anxieties to move those to opportunities. Then we'll move that very specifically into what matters when we're building a game plan for our future. And then how do we do some scenario planning? What's a framework for how we could do that? And then I'll leave about the last 8 to 10 minutes for opportunities for you to ask questions and connect with me and see if I can answer those. And if not, we'll find somebody who can, or we'll send some answers your way. Again, Janet Pilcher, I lead student education and have been in leadership most of my life, and just appreciate the opportunity to be connected with you all today, and appreciate the work that you're doing to keep things moving forward in a positive direction. So let's start with our first poll. Let's just talk about anxiety. So what's your level of anxiety about re-entering your work environment? As if you're in schools, you're thinking about re-entering with potentially with students in the fall. If you're working in another environment, you may be in the process of re-entering. So what's your level of anxiety about re-entering? So as I look at the poll coming in, we have most people around a 7, kind of to an 8. So most of us are on the high end of the anxiety scale, and rightfully so. So maybe we've done some work where we're not quite at the anxiety level of 10, but we're kind of in that 7, 8, 9 mode, and maybe some of us aren't that anxious at all. So maybe we should learn from you all in terms of how you've managed that as well along the way. So let's talk a little bit about anxiety and how we manage anxieties and turn that into opportunities. So as you all know, I really fall back on John Cotter's work, where he talks about the concept of going from survive to thrive. And when we are in that survival mode, we're under physical threat. There are many unknowns. I know this is all going to sound very familiar to you as we think about our last couple months of living. You know, we don't have control to eliminate the threat. And we have this kind of hope that we're just going to get back to normal. Like, can't we just get there? And this other aspect of thinking is this can't last too long. well, let's just get through it. And surely there's another side to this, and hopefully the sooner the better. And so those are all the natural things that we feel when we go through some type of disruption, and something of what we're experiencing now with the coronavirus. It's a major disruption across our world. And so we are trying to get to managing that, or reducing anxiety and fear, and managing through that, to look for opportunities and to build actionable items and actionable things that we do in those opportunities. So I think we're kind of in that reset mode of where are we from survive to thrive. And so what does it mean in order for us to get to that thrive mode? One of the things, if I'm going to focus more on the first two today than any of the others, and as we do the webinars, we'll continue to focus on some of the other items in the thrive mode, but it's reducing ambiguity and building clarity, so that the more we can build clarity around what we do and communicate that, the more we reduce anxiety for ourselves and for others. We still have to focus on our core business. For us in education, it's student success and really helping students achieve and succeed. And we're still focusing, like we talked about last week in the learning section, on the fundamentals on how to get there. So it's teaching and leadership fundamentals of how we get to helping our students and families in this time of transition. We have to experiment with new ways. And once we do the first two, it's easier to do the third bullet. We have to make difficult decisions where needed. And we have an opportunity to keep and get the right people on our team. So when we look at Thrive as leaders and as people who are leading actions and activities and teams, if we focus on these areas, I think we can really look at what the opportunities are ahead. So let's focus on clarity and those fundamentals of what's most important. For those of you that have connected with us and our coaching team, we've always talked about a scorecard and measures that matter. I'm going to just point to things that I think are a little bit different as we move into building clarity and move into next year. We've focused on those large results of measures that we're trying to achieve. And what I put on measures that matter is the two words more often. So I think we're looking at measures that matter, and we're looking at those measures more often. So they're more formative in nature. So our scorecards are really returning from some of those annualized results measures to those pulse check type of measures that we can measure along the way. So for example, it's more formative measures with student achievement, continuous pulse checks to determine how students are engaged, really looking at student persistence and retention, like daily attendance and persistence of students in courses and how they're progressing in those courses. When we look at people, it's monthly checks on pulse checks, survey checks on engagement. It's looking at retention on a daily basis and looking at those trends. And it's looking at well-being by leader to employee one-on-one connections and rounds with our employees. Student, employee, and safety and customer safety when they come on campus, really about prevention metrics. And when we look at service, it's twofold. And again, continuous pulse checks, continuous metrics of getting perception data of how well are we helping each other and how well are we helping our students and families, and doing those rounding checks with our students and families as well. And then as resources, our metrics, our resources are going to be tight. And so it's looking at ways that we're spending our resources so that we can maximize those dollars to impact student achievement and student success. All to say is different types of measures in the same categories, more often, more pulse checks, and connecting to those metrics. So how do we build the game plan to win? So I talked about the first box, pillars and measures that matter. Then as we look at those measures that matter, we think about the strategic priorities. And in other words, what are the actions? What are strategically the things that we need to do in order to make sure that we're creating those winning moves that are going to help us achieve those results along the way? Those are the conversations we're having with each other. What's really, really important here is, although what's in front of us will be in the fall or right around the corner, we have to, I think, begin to think about our winning moves 2 to 3 years out. what can we do now that's going to help us when we re-enter in the fall in our schools and universities, but what basically can we do now that helps us become a different place and a better place with opportunities 2 to 3 years out. We then move to aligning our metrics within our divisions and our units. So we're building those improvements across the board because there are going to be different metrics and actions that each unit needs to take in order to get to the whole. And we apply those short cycle improvement, strategic improvement retreats every 45 to 90 days, where we're talking about what's working, looking at the data and those short cycle metrics, what's working, what's not working, and where it's not working, how do we make those adjustments? That's a way that we can really build that game plan to win, measuring what matters more often with a great game plan, with a very specific process of focusing attention and conversations around that. That is one way to reduce our anxiety and turn anxiety into opportunities. So let's go to the second poll and the question: to what extent have you completed scenario planning to make decisions on how you re-enter? Because we don't know, it's the unknown of how we're going to re-enter. To what extent have you had conversations around scenarios that could take place and how we plan for those? So let's look at that and see kind of where we stand. So letting that kind of roll in, kind of mixed a little bit here, kind of in the 4 to 5, a little bit in the 7, kind of more 4 or 5, I think, right in the 4. So I think we have probably right in the you're in the right place. Maybe we're thinking about it, but we've not necessarily completed and executed, and sometimes maybe we haven't even started. And so I really wanted to spend a few minutes with you just focusing on the different types of scenarios that will play in. I've read so many articles this week from higher education and K-12 about conversations, for example, in K-12 that superintendents are beginning to have with their boards, and that information is beginning to build out in the community. And so in our next series, we're going to talk about what happens when we have community resistance, because once we start communicating what the possibilities are for how we're going to enter our world, even when it's unknown, we're going to begin to get that resistance from our communities, because we can't make everyone happy, and we have to do what we think is the right thing so that students are supported and families are supported so that they have every opportunity to achieve success. So let's go through just a little bit about scenario planning. We are in the process of really thinking through looking at multiple sources about the types of questions that you answer within each of the scenarios across very specific aspects of the organization. So I think we could have more than these 4, but I'm just kind of simplifying for now to say everything could be back to normal. So if everything's back to normal, how do we re-enter, and how do we think about what it's going to mean for learning, looking at potential loss learning for students and students who haven't been part of that learning in a way that we've needed them to be from March until May. Internal operations, what is it going to mean in the way that we build internal and external operations, and what does that mean for the way that we've refocused our attention on parents and families and how we help parents and families support their children. The next one is back on site full time with social distancing and other CDC guidelines. So maybe we're just back on site, but we have to follow the guidelines. So probably the first scenario, everything back to normal, is probably not going to be. Well, maybe that's in that we would hope that we could be back there. That would be the easiest thing. But unfortunately, I don't think we're going to be quite there. We could be back on site full time with social distancing. So what does that mean across the board within learning, internal, external operations, and parents and families? We could be in some type of hybrid approach where we have social distancing and virtual. And again, how do we answer a certain set of questions so that we can work through what that means for learning and operations and parents and families. Or we might be right back into where we ended this year, where everything is virtual. And so part of what we are trying to do right now as we work with organizations is ask the reflective questions about what worked, what hasn't worked, what could we do better, what would we have done differently if we had more time to think about how we would plan to move into that virtual world. We have indeed been in that survival mode because that's about the only place we could be. And we've also probably learned and improved along the way from March to May. And some of us may have just been in that survival mode. And so I think we can just relax with that to say that was what we did. It's the best we can do. And then I'd ask us to rethink our minds now to say that's not going to be good enough when we move into August, because regardless of the scenario that we land on and that we choose or that's provided to us, we have to provide an excellent learning environment for children and families and give them the same or better opportunities than they had when they were with us in school in those normal operations. So this is, again, as we're beginning to think about, we have the sets of questions that we're working with our partners to begin to ask them around these scenarios to get people thinking about what that would look like. So I'd like to just, kind of talk through for a few minutes. Gosh, I mean, as we look at what I've just talked about today, our ability to build clarity, to focus our attention on those metrics, to rethink our metrics around those that matter and doing it more often, to build that strategic improvement cycle into our DNA of our organization so that we can make sure we're doing the right thing. And then looking at all the various scenarios for how we might enter the world and making sure we have a plan for all of those. That's a lot. It's a lot. It's more than what most leaders have ever had to go through in our schools and in our organizations across the country. They're having to do the same type of scenario planning, and it's a lot. So our job as a leader is to really help our teams move from anxiety to opportunity, and to really begin to think about how we can make some of those strategic decisions, maybe decisions we wouldn't have made before. I talked about that several webinars ago. We have opportunities to make decisions in ways that we've never made decisions before. And our question next week is going to be, what if we tomorrow could make any decision we wanted without resistance? What would we do? Maybe that's just a great way to think and an exercise to go through. So I'll just start with these three questions, or just kind of end really with these three questions of our feeling as a leader. Will I make the right decisions? And so as I think about right decisions, there's so many things that are going through my mind right now. So for example, we host conferences every year. So when do we make the decision to either hold virtual conferences or go through that scenario planning? And one thing that I have really learned myself in the last 2 to 3 weeks, more specifically, is sometimes the right decision may be an earlier decision because it gives us an opportunity to plan, communicate, and to prepare people. Sometimes we have that option, and I realize sometimes we don't. But if we have opportunities to make decisions in a way where we can help prepare people, develop people, and make sure that when we enter the world that we're going to enter with, we are entering with the best case scenario. It's also going to be influenced by what other people around you do and how we collectively make those decisions together for the right reasons. How transparent should I be with communication? I always look at transparency in this way. Transparency doesn't necessarily mean you have to share everything, but what it does mean is that you share and consistently communicate so that people have the clarity and understanding of what the brutal facts are, but we're always sharing them with optimism and a plan that we're going to solve for whatever's ahead of us with those brutal facts. As a leader, that's our job. Transparency doesn't mean we just push it out there and say, here it is, and here's what's in front of us. But it's really saying, here are the things that are significant, and these are the things that may be difficult for us. And I'm confident that we as a team can move forward and achieve together in a way that's going to make us better on the other side. And here's how. Here's how we can do it. And I'd love for your ideas along the way. And the last thing I'll just contribute here today, and maybe this is really personal to me right now because all of us are going through as leaders a way to really figure out how to make this transformation work. Do I have the energy as a leader to transform our organization to get to the better side? The answer to that is clearly yes, we have to have the energy. And it's also a different type of energy. So in ways that we have to really refocus our attention and take care of our mind and our hearts and our spirits in order to conserve energy to build that transformation, those things become really important. And that doesn't necessarily mean we just get to go out on an island for a little while and get away from everything, but it's really beginning to try to balance how we do that for ourselves so that we can do what's right for the people who we lead each day and for the people that we serve. It's a difficult question. It's a difficult time. And because you're here, I have great confidence that we can all get to move from anxiety to opportunity and be better on the other side. So I'll take a few minutes for questions. So one of the questions, how do you know you made the right decision? It's not always easy to tell, especially when the outcomes still have negative impact on people. Yeah, this is what a great question. I don't know that you'll ever know if you made the quote right decision. And I think two things here. One is when we are making decisions with people that we serve, for the people that we serve, and we're thinking of those people as keeping with their best interest, and we're doing what we think is the best and the right thing, we're usually making the best decision, which usually ends up being the right decision. And sometimes that right decision doesn't necessarily mean that we're not going to hurt people. And I think that as we begin to look at declines in budgets or different ways that we're going to have to manage our physical environment and make decisions that may be different than we've ever made, we are making them with good values, with good principles. And sometimes it impacts people in a negative way. And that's not when it does, it's not necessarily that's a bad decision. It's an unfortunate decision, but our ability to handle that with style and grace and ease and values with the people that we connect to is what makes us a leader that's going to manage through that. Any thoughts on creating a vision for the work ahead of us? So when we think about a vision, I think absolutely. As I'm working with Brendan Kelly, who is the new president of the University of West Georgia. And one of the things that he's done is he's created 4 vision statements for where he wants to take the institution, to the next decade. And the opportunity that he has is he's a new president there, a new leader, and he has great understanding of the field and how he wants to build the vision for that institution with a very forward thinking look and looking at all the parameters that are going to come in or the variables that are going to come in to affect change. And so I would look, to simplify that a little bit, instead of this large vision, I would just build those statements of, in thinking of over the next 10 years, if I'm 10 years out and I'm looking back, what could we do that would be different than what we're doing now, but we know would make a greater impact based on where we are now to where our world and our lives are going to be. And just take that moment to really think about what those vision statements might be for the way that we build that vision. Maybe that simplifies it a little bit for you. With virtual schools in recent times, how do we create that human connect to get the team on board? How do we do this if it's your first year in a new leadership role. Gosh, it's so, I think what I'm thinking of right now when you say that is we've hired 2 new team members, and we've never met them face to face. It's all been in the virtual environment. One of the recommendations I would give, one of the things that we talked about very early on in the webinars were daily huddles, 15-minute to 20-minute daily huddles. We're making those human connections with people with a very structured agenda. Just making those personal connections that are shorter. I go back to what I was talking about with measures that matter. I have really learned in this virtual world that shorter, more times of connecting in shorter segments becomes extremely meaningful. And so any type of connection that we can make with human connection and talking to each other, asking for care and concern, leader rounding, which was a part of that first webinar and part of a toolkit that we have developed, is another way to do that. We'll have resources, I think, that we can connect back and really help with that. So I think, Casey, if you're listening, just let's make sure we connect some resources to help out there. How do I help my board or other stakeholders understand that we have to adjust our goals? First of all, I think there's the communication of why. I think we talk about why, what, and how. And when we're communicating, rather than just change our goals and say, here's what they are, really is starting with connecting people to why are we doing what we're doing? What's in front of us? So it's having those two-way communications rather than saying, here it is. It's really maybe having some probing questions with your board or other stakeholders to look at what the problems are and a problem identification, doing some probing questions with helping understand that problem and helping them understand that problem, and then beginning to set some structure in place for how we begin to change those goals and what advantages those might have, and get them to talk back to you or with you about what that might mean to them. So for example, if we are trying to increase student learning, we need to, my sense is, it's keywords, my sense is we need to look at measures more often. What would that, if I'm talking to a teacher, what would that look like for you? What would measures more often look like for you? With a board, I know you would want to see how learning is occurring over time. So I'm thinking we need to do more formative measures more often. What would you want to see? What does that look like for you? So we're just using, rather than telling language, we're using questioning type of language, but we're allowing our questions to really formulate where we're trying to go as well. Last one here. What is a good first step to get your team out of the present to be able to move to thrive? So probably one of the things that you're facing is people are tired. I think we're at the end. So here's what I'm finding when I work with organizations. They're like, we've done a good job at moving. We did a great job at moving from where we were to where we are now. Maybe there are things we could have done better, but the idea that we were able to do that, my gosh, please let us just celebrate that. And I think it's important. So I think one of the things, and that's one thing I've done with people that I work with over the past month, let's harvest those wins. So first and foremost, harvest the wins that you've had and celebrate those, and then ask people to be reflective and really go through that process of, now we've talked about what's worked in harvesting the wins. Now let's just have a discussion on what didn't work as well as we wanted to, and how could we do that better. Again, conversations and scaffolding those conversations are going to help build energy into your organization, energy into your teams, and really help you as a leader move people forward in a particular direction. Also, I think it is important as we end in May for people to take a break, to take a little bit of a break and give them the freedom for that break, and then ask them to come back even more energized, because we're going to look at acknowledging we have anxiety and fear and acknowledging that, but we really have great opportunities. And the more we engage people in conversations around that opportunity, the better input we're going to receive and the better we're going to be on that other side. And we're collectively working as a team to get to that point where we're going to do phenomenal things. I will summarize here. As I mentioned, as our team, we're going through the transitions like most everybody. And as tired as sometimes I feel from going through what we're going through, I've also never felt more energized and more excited about what the opportunities can be. And sometimes I get tired because I know there are so many opportunities and I want to have all the energy in the world to get there. And and my job then is, how do I manage that for myself so I can help manage that with the team? There's so much opportunity for us when we face these huge obstacles. So I hope that you take care of yourself, take a little bit of a break, bring your teams together, join with them to continue the conversations, build clarity, and then build the exploration of what you can do around the vision statements that you create, and then hardwire that improvement process with those measures that matter more often. I have great confidence that it'll make a big difference for you and your teams. Just appreciate the opportunity for you to be with us today and for the connection. I enjoy doing these. So thank you very much for your time. I know it's valuable. Have a good